So I'm building on many of the conversations that you've already been hearing today and hopefully over the past few days. As you are likely very aware, humans have been making machines work for them and with them and trying to help ourselves and our families, our friends, to solve problems using tools, making tools. This is a water-powered automaton orchestra back in 1206 that was described by Al-Jazari. And we want to do this because it makes sense. These are things that we want to improve our lives with. We want to make more time for ourselves to be able to do the things we actually want to spend time doing instead of the laundry or whatever. And as new technologies are developed, we find there are new problems. And the biggest problem being the lack of physical interactions with a lot of systems and the lack of trust that we have with those systems. So here we have a surgeon looking at information and needing to trust that that information is what they want to find, that they're expecting to find. It may not be actually what they want to find, but that they are expecting to find. And the patient laying there needs to be able to trust that that surgeon and the person who is helping to administer that study or that exam know what they're doing. And they also have to trust that that machine is not going to cause them any harm. And then the person that's assisting needs to know how that system works, needs to be able to gain the trust of the patient, needs to understand what the surgeon needs. So there's a lot of complexity just in the people portion of this, much less the technology. And the technology, unfortunately, can be the biggest problem. And what we've seen with AI systems that have been released more recently is that a lot of these systems, unfortunately, do not include user experience research. They don't include the type of background knowledge and information gathering that would help to prevent harm. So instead, unfortunately, we see stories like these, at least in the US, where systems are built and then misused or abused or never work properly because the data that they were built on is not appropriate, because they were not tested adequately, because there were not safeguards in place to protect people. So this all requires, as we were just hearing, a broadening of our work. We really need to be more aware, more conscious about the work that we're doing, and we need to ask different questions. So we need to really take a step back often. And when looking particularly at artificial intelligence systems, is it really a situation where artificial intelligence is going to improve the situation? And is this a situation where those improvements are actually going to be worthwhile? Is the investment that we need to make a system that's artificially intelligent more than if we just added a few more people? Are there other solutions that might make more sense than this very dynamic, very complex, very expensive system to build? And then looking at those benefits and risks of the systems and being able to tell, while we aren't always the most comfortable with quantitative data, it's really the qualitative experience we need to look at anyway. Are we seeing the improvements we expected? Is the system really performing the way we expect it to? And I want to take a step back, if you're not familiar with artificial intelligence, and talk about the basis of it, and that's data. Large amounts of data. And this is an old statistic, but physicians back in 2004, almost 20 years ago, supposedly needed about 90 hours of reading a week to keep up with research. And if you'll remember, when COVID started, there was huge amounts of research being done. To keep up with that is probably far greater than that. AI might be able to help with this. AI could potentially help to make more informed, have the physicians make more informed decisions. But all of that data may not be appropriate for AI systems. It may not be able to be included in an AI system. And if it's not available and not appropriate, then it's not going to work. It doesn't actually matter that there's all that data if you can't make it work for the system. An example for those of you who are kind of new to this, in computer vision, if you had a training set on the right there with red, yellow, and white vehicles, and the information that was found once the system was working, were all red, yellow, and white vehicles, you could say that this was a well-performing system. This is a system that is maybe even accurate. Accuracy is not the most important thing, but in this case, sure. However, if that information is not a match with what is found in the field, so if all the vehicles are blue, or if you'll notice all those vehicles are being photographed on a bright sunny day, if it's snowing, if it's raining, if the seasons change, if anything weird happens, that system may not be able to do what it's expected to do. It may not recognize vehicles even of the same colors, much less different colors in different situations. That may or may not matter, but how do you want the system to respond? How do you convey that information to someone who's using this system that, oh, this is a blue car? Or what happens if the people in those vehicles are people you care about? How important is it that that system makes a guess? And do you want it to make a guess? And what are the implications of it making a guess? And so thinking about those types of situations, it's not enough to just say it's really good at recognizing cars. Which cars? Under which conditions? And how do you convey that to the person who uses the system so that they know when to trust it and how well it's working? So this is bias. Those red, yellow, and white cars are bias in the data. And bias is inherent in all data because all data is created by humans. We make it all. We make the choices about what's included and what's excluded. We make the choices about why we're even doing the data collection to begin with. And so complete objectivity in any system is misleading and frankly wrong. Numbers are not unbiased. Math is not unbiased. All things that humans make, again, are biased. But it can have purpose and be helpful. And we want to identify that bias and understand it so that we can then make systems that are safe for people. So if you think about a tomato, how many of you consider a tomato a fruit? Okay? And how many of you consider it to be a vegetable? Yeah, about half. That's pretty typical. So if we're making a system for a grocery store in the US, tomatoes are always in the vegetable portion of the grocery store. They are never with the fruit. And if we're making a system for scientists, we would definitely want to make sure that tomatoes were always labeled as fruit. And so these types of very seemingly minor contextual differences make a huge difference when you're making a system, particularly if you are labeling data, and some people are labeling it a fruit, and some people are labeling a vegetable, you're not going to get a very good system. So there's a lot of detailed work involved in making these systems and decisions that need to be made and made clear to everyone involved. So the bias is in the data primarily, but it is also in the algorithm selection and training. And different combinations, of course, would result in different types of bias, as you can imagine. But understanding why that data was collected in the first place, what is included and what is excluded, what processes were used, and why the data was made, what the recommended use is for, is really important when you're applying a data set to a particular situation. You're not going to get good results if you're taking a data set that wasn't made for what you're trying to do and applying it to a situation where there's a mismatch. That makes sense, but you'd be surprised what people do with, they've got data. So our goal is always to reduce harm, should be, and reduce the harmful bias in the system. But we need to be careful because particularly groups of people who are frequently marginalized are much more likely to be systematically marginalized by systems that use historical data. History, and I'll give you a quote in a minute, is data is history. Data is going to contain all the decisions that were made about particular groups of people, and when racism, sexism, et cetera, is in that data, the system will find that pattern, and then will continue to produce that pattern over and over again, which is worse than the individual who was racist, because now you have a system that's doing it to everyone. So removing that bias is impossible because there are actually indicators in the data that you may not notice or that you may not even see until the system finds it for you. We need those indicators to help us track the bias. We need those indicators to know that the system is performing the way we want it to. If we take out gender as a field, if you imagine like an Excel spreadsheet, you can no longer track it. That does no one any good. You need to keep that data in the data set so that you can then find when your system is working and when it's not. And Joy Buolamwini talks about this much more eloquently than I do. Data is a function of our history. The past dwells within, showing us the inequalities that have always been there. If you've not seen her movie, Coded Bias, I highly recommend that you see it. Coded Bias, it's on Netflix, among other places. But data is not inherently neutral, again, and math cannot fix social problems. And AI systems are just math plus data. So we need to understand the complexity of context. This is very familiar for most of us in this room. Understanding the environment, the people, the information, and the system capabilities, and how they fit or don't with the system they're being introduced to. And their dynamic context to begin with. So we're talking about a dynamic system. AI systems are dynamic, with people who are constantly in some form of change or adjustment. But we need to know also how they're going to share information. How is the system going to show the context has changed? How is the human going to share with the system that context has changed? How are we going to maintain clarity around the intent, the operational intent that we have in the work that we're doing? If that changes, how does the system find out? We get a phone call or a text or whatever. Oh, now you're going to do this. How does the system find out? How do we give that information to it? And then how does it evolve as well based on those changing contexts? And a lot of this has to do with both small interactions and interactions over time. This is some work I've done with Dwayne Degler, where we really think about the interactions both at a very short-term moment. So if you think about a semi-autonomous vehicle, if I am allowing it to be in autonomy for a short period of time between two exits on a highway, that is an interaction, and then I might take over at some point. There's also the longer trip that I'm on. So there may be some small interactions between and then that longer trip that I'm trying to do. If you think about interactions with financial systems, when you're doing research, any type of activity, there's short-term activities and longer-term activities. Things change. How are we going to have the system change and adapt based on that change? Again, with semi-autonomous vehicles, on the far right here, well, you're left, but the vehicle on the bottom is the representation of the machine. If a machine and the human, if they both identify an obstacle at the same time, but the machine, the semi-autonomous vehicle, is in autonomy, it may react and then respond and move out of the way or move the vehicle out of the way of the obstacle. Great. However, on this side, we have a situation where the vehicle notices and cannot respond quickly enough. And we see this, unfortunately, quite a bit, where the system switches. It passes the control to the human very quickly. Unfortunately, if the human's not prepared, that results in a crash. How those transitions occur, how that turn-taking occurs is really important for physical systems, obviously, but also for any type of system where we're interacting with a machine. We need to know, is it my turn? Is it the system's turn? Who has the ball, if you will, and what is going to happen next? So again, those interactions, they can be very short, they can be very long over time, but there is communication, negotiation, and coordination needed between the humans and the machines, potentially multiple humans and multiple machines, if we're really looking at complex systems. And all of that has to be communicated in ways that sustain a productive working relationship, for lack of a better term. We also still need to think about the human strengths. We are still quite good at many things. This is some research I did just last year with Dr. Amanda Mueller, where we were looking at the old model, some of you may remember, men are better at and machines are better at. We switched it to humans. And there's still a lot of things that humans are better at than machines. And this is from a study we did with people who were making machine learning and AI systems. So they were the ones who identified these skills. So we should not be making systems that do these things. We should do the other things with those systems. All this is really about trustworthiness. Making systems that people are willing to trust, making systems that people are willing to be responsible for. So all these systems, AI systems, really need to be designed with and for people. And people need to be able to trust their tools to use them appropriately. If I am over-trusting or under-trusting, that can be an issue. And human-centered design, obviously, is a big part of making a good system. Knowing what the capabilities and limitations are and being able to convey those in a way that people understand, that transparency, but not the wrong transparency. It has to be appropriate for that audience. Monitoring and oversight so that people are safe and kept safe. These systems, again, they're dynamic, so they're going to change. What happens when they change? Who gets warned? How do you turn the system off? How do you revert to a previous version? And making sure that people are able to calibrate their trust, to have enough evidence of how the system works to be able to trust it effectively. Part of this is just providing evidence. This is a photo I took in my neighborhood. This paint appeared overnight with no particular warning, no signage. And if you think about this, is new information. If I had a semi-autonomous vehicle on this road, how would it stay in the lane? Right? Where's the parking? Like, if it's not aware that that's just paint, ignore that, but don't ignore the other paint. How do you teach that system to respond appropriately to new situations? And how do you get the system to tell you how confident it is, that it understands what this means? Because I don't understand what this means. The system should be able to convey that in a way that is reasonable and safe. So calibrated trust, I mentioned this already. Calibrated trust is personal. Well, trust in general is personal, I should say. But calibrated trust is taking the evidence that we have of a situation, understanding the capabilities of a system, and then determining that in the current context, based on my personal experience, I trust the system. But distrust is a real concern. Distrust is when we do not trust the system to work well, and we disuse it or reject it outright. And we know that that happens a lot. Overtrust, on the other side, is when our trust exceeds the abilities of the system. So we apply the system to situations we shouldn't. We read a book while we're in our Tesla. Not a good idea. We need calibrated trust. We need people behind the wheel of a vehicle to know that they are always responsible for that vehicle, at least for the current time, and that they need to keep their eye on the road and their hands on the wheel. Calibrated trust, understanding the system's abilities and limitations and having that appropriate response to it. And this is complex and it's transient. We change our level of trust depending on our experiences. Our most recent experience or our long-term experience is going to change that. So if we start with a reasonable level of trust, and through interactions we decide that this is a reasonable system. We might come in with overtrust, thinking that this thing, it's not only going to do my taxes, but it's also going to do my laundry. It's awesome. Yeah, we're going to be disappointed. And then if we come in with that distrust, we don't like AI, we don't want to use it, et cetera, ideally throughout using the system we find that there is a way to trust it because we have evidence. We can just determine how to trust it and work with it. So what do we mean by broadening? There's a lot of work to do. We don't quite know yet, but it is definitely not just the user experience honeycomb or fill in your favorite model of user experience. There's a lot more that we need to do. A lot of this is speculative work, so we need to determine and think ahead of what the consequences are of the work that we're doing. What happens if I combine these two data sets? What happens if the system is running and it starts to rain or whatever it is? Thinking about the consequences and how people are going to respond and how to keep people safe is extremely important. So we need to activate curiosity in our teams, not just us, but the engineers that we work with, the data scientists, all the individuals that make AI systems have to begin to think more speculatively. This also means our education system needs to change, but that's not for today. We need to think about those negative consequences, particularly for people who are already in marginalized groups and will probably be continuing to be marginalized with these new systems. We really need to think about the implications of that and not do things that actually create more harm. One of the methods is abusability testing. That was in the workshop earlier this week, where we really look at what is the value proposition for this system. We want to know the good things that it can do. And then what are the vulnerabilities? What are the things that might go wrong? What are the things that could be a risk? And then think through what abuse could occur. And this can be a fun activity if you have a dark sense of humor. The last stage of this is actually doing a Black Mirror style episode, if you're familiar with that, and taking it all the way, because that helps us to start to think more broadly about implications, much beyond just a computer screen and typing. Dr. Ayanna Howard also talks about rewarding team members for finding ethical bugs, so making it more of a team effort and a little bit competitive to really try to encourage everyone to take part in this. There's a card game that one of my colleagues at CMU has made called What Could Go Wrong? It's very similar to Cards Against Humanity, if you're familiar with that. And again, these are all speculative and fun, again, depending on who you are, activities that help you think a little bit more broadly about what could go wrong and how to potentially then prevent harm or mitigate if necessary. But this does require conversations. People have to communicate with each other. I know, it's hard. But really talking about what do we value? What lines won't this system cross? What are we not going to allow the system to do? Who could be hurt? And also, particularly, how are we shifting power or information or knowledge or access? Something is shifting with the introduction of this system. What is it? And is it going to be something that we can make okay, or is it really going to be causing more harm than necessary? And if it's more harm, then say no. Like, we have a responsibility to actually not develop things that are harmful when we can. This also requires leadership, talked about a few minutes ago as well, that can help you establish psychological safety, where you feel like you can safely question and bring up issues. It's not an easy situation to find in tech, but when you are a leader, make sure that you are making a psychologically safe area and try to find those teams to work with, because you'll make better work. Adopt technology ethics. There are hundreds of sets of these out there. The Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI is still by far one of the most broad and actionable ones. And these help to harmonize groups. Ideally, you're working with a diverse group anyway, with different ideas of morals and ethics, et cetera. This helps everybody to be on the same page, literally, and to balance the pace of change and give people explicit permission to question. So, you know what, this sounds like it's not supporting our code or our technical ethics. Maybe we should look at this again. It takes it off of the personal and puts it back on the technology and the match with the system, or the ethics. You can also use checklists and frameworks and guidelines. There are lots and lots of these around as well to help support the work with these set of ethics. These are two that I've worked on. And these really, again, help to bridge the gap between statements like do no harm, which is not something you can implement ever. Something's going to be harmed. You're either going to use electricity and harm the environment, or you might step on an ant. I don't know, but it's not possible to implement that as a software solution. You need more clear guidance, and tools like these and many others can help you to really figure out what it is you need to do to make an AI system that works. This is all new and uncomfortable work, and Laura Kalbach talks about that we just need to get used to being uncomfortable. It's really part of the new work that we have to do. We have to have these conversations with people who do not want to have the conversations, and they need to get used to having hard questions asked. A couple quick big topics. Authorship and accountability. Anybody recognize this image? I got one. Okay, this is an image that was created using Midjourney, and it won an award in Colorado in the USA for an art contest. And there was a lot of questions at the time. Well, wait a minute, did the AI win? No, this guy, person, Jason Allen, used Midjourney and created this image. It's his responsibility. If he's stealing somebody else's work, that's his responsibility. AIs don't create things, humans create things. Humans make AI systems, humans have responsibility. And making sure that that is maintained is really important. It's his responsibility what he submitted. He won. That's great. If I'd used Photoshop and done the same thing, I could have won potentially. Not much of a difference. Those significant decisions that the systems make need to be explained, they need to be able to be overridden, they need to be appealable and reversible. GDPR here in the EU in general is a good step in that direction. It's not perfect, but it is a good step in that direction, making sure that humans can appeal decisions made by systems. But the responsibilities also need to be explicitly defined between the people and the systems. Who's doing what, who's responsible for what, et cetera. In the end, humans have to be responsible for everything the system does. Figuring out who that is not always easy. We need to make sure that humans can unplug the machines. Grady Booch talks about this in a TED Talk from quite a while ago. This is not sci-fi, this is not a bad movie. We need to make sure that we have backdoors, ways to turn off systems, ways to revert systems to previous versions and protect people and make sure that we're always in control of them. We're not perfect. To be clear, humans have a lot of problems. There are plenty of evil people, but humans have things to lose. A computer does not. I can go to jail. I can be killed, but a computer cannot. You unplug it, it doesn't care. I guarantee it. Humans have to be accountable in the bigger sense as well. We need to make sure that not only do we have ultimate control, that we're able to monitor these systems, we're able to control them, but also if it's an important, irreversible decision, a human has to make it. So that's with regard to a person's life, a quality of life, their health, their reputation, any of those kinds of decisions, there has to be a human making that decision. And again, that is because of the fact that we have real consequences, and if we make the wrong call, we made the wrong call. That happens. But if a computer makes it, that's not good. We don't want to put that on a computer. So we need to design AI to work with and for people. We need to make sure that we ask tough questions, that we are challenging each other, that we empower diverse teams, that we have inclusive environments, that people are able to ask questions, tough ones, encourage those conversations, and get people to be curious and speculative, imaginative, and do responsible, intelligent, intentional design. And because we aren't perfect, AI will not be perfect, and we need to accept that and know that it will be biased, but if we're aware of those biases and manage it, we can protect people and keep people safe. My contact information. Thank you.